Hey, thanks for clicking. This is Companion Saga. A man spends 40 years building a life, only to find out the woman sleeping beside him was tearing it apart piece by piece. But someone was watching. Stay to the end. Your Honor, I'd like to submit something to the court before the settlement is finalized. My daughter Claire stood up from the gallery benches in the back of courtroom 4B of the Franklin County Common Pleas Court. She was 24 years old, wearing a blazer I had never seen before. Her hair pulled back, looking nothing like the little girl I used to drive to soccer practice on Saturday mornings in the rain. She looked like someone who had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. Judge Patricia Howell looked up from the paperwork in front of her. "And you are?" "Claire Callahan. I'm the daughter of the respondent." She held up a manila folder that was at least an inch thick. "I have documentation I believe is directly relevant to the asset division in this case. My wife, Renata, was sitting at the petitioner's table in a cream-colored blouse she had bought specifically for today. She had told me so 3 weeks earlier, mentioning it the way you mentioned something harmless, something irrelevant. I'm getting something nice to wear to the hearing, Howard. I want to look presentable. I had thought nothing of it at the time. I thought nothing of a lot of things back then." She turned when Claire spoke. The color drained from her face so completely that for a moment I thought she might faint. "Claire," her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "What are you doing? What I should have done a long time ago, Mom?" The folder was passed to the bailiff. The bailiff passed it to the judge. Judge Howell opened it, looked at the first page, then the second. Then she looked up at Renata with an expression I will not forget for the rest of my life. "Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Howard Callahan. I'm 63 years old. I spent most of my working life as a licensed master electrician running my own contracting business out of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing that would make the evening news, but honest work, the kind that lets you sleep at night. I built that business from a second-hand van and 2 toolboxes in 1988. By the time I sold it and retired 4 years ago, I had 14 employees and a reputation in the commercial sector that took me 2 decades to earn. I met Renata Voss at a 4th of July party in 1991. She was 28, recently divorced, working as an office manager at a medical supply company. I was 31, too busy with work to date seriously, and utterly unprepared for her. She was sharp and funny and laughed at things other women didn't find funny. We dated for a year, got married in the fall of 1992, and for a long time, things were genuinely good. We had Claire in 1999. We bought a house in Worthington. We took vacations. We argued about normal things, money and schedules, and whose turn it was to call the plumber. Nothing that alarmed me. Nothing that made me think the foundation was cracked. But looking back, there were signs I explained away because I loved her, and because I trusted her, and because after 30 years of marriage, you stop questioning things that have always been a certain way. Renata handled our finances. She always had. It made sense in the beginning because she came from an accounting background and I was working 70 hours a week building the business. She paid the bills, managed the accounts, handled the investments. I reviewed things quarterly, or I thought I did. What I actually did was glance at summaries she prepared for me, summaries that showed what she wanted me to see. The first time something felt genuinely wrong was about 3 years ago. I had retired by then and started paying closer attention to our finances because I had more time and because retirement has a way of making you think about money differently. I noticed a withdrawal from our joint savings account. $12,000. I asked Renata about it, and she told me it was a repair assessment for the lake house we owned in Hocking Hills. That makes sense, I thought. The lake house was old. It needed work. I didn't ask to see the assessment paperwork. I was a fool. The signs accumulated after that, but they accumulated slowly. The way water gets into old foundations. A new car for Renata that she said she bought with money from her mother's estate. A trip to Scottsdale with her friend Donna that seemed longer and more expensive than their usual weekends. A man named Garrett, whose name came up in conversation more often than names usually do. A business contact, Renata explained. He works in real estate. We've been talking about some investment opportunities. I let all of it slide by. I had spent 40 years being the kind of man who trusted his wife completely, and old habits are harder to break than people think. Then came my retirement party. Claire had organized it. 62 years old, 31 years in business, a backyard full of friends and colleagues who had come to eat barbecue and give me a hard time about getting old. It should have been one of the best nights of my life. 3 days later, Renata sat me down at the kitchen table with the quiet, deliberate manner of someone delivering a prepared speech. "Howard, I want you to hear this from me directly. I've filed for divorce. My attorney will be contacting yours." I stared at her for a long moment. Just like that. It hasn't been just like that. It's been a long time coming. I've been unhappy for years. You never said anything. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something embarrassingly naive. "I tried, Howard. You were always working. And then, when you retired, you were always in the garage, or watching the game, or doing something that wasn't about us. I stopped trying." She left the room. I sat there until the kitchen got dark, and then I sat there a while longer. Claire drove down from her apartment in Cleveland the next weekend. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table, and she looked at me for a long moment before she spoke. "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without doing anything about it until I tell you it's time. I don't understand." She put her hand on the table between us. "I work in financial compliance." She said it carefully. "I know how money moves, and I know how it gets hidden, and I know what it looks like when someone is moving it on purpose. Claire, 3 years ago, I started noticing things. Things I couldn't explain." She opened her laptop and turned it toward me. "I've been tracking it, Dad. All of it. Mom has been moving money for at least 5 years, maybe longer. What she showed me that night rearranged everything I thought I knew about my own life. The withdrawals from savings had not gone to any repair assessment. They had gone to a series of accounts in Renata's name alone. Accounts I didn't know existed, accounts she had opened without my knowledge or presence. The lake house had a second mortgage on it, not because we needed the money, because she had borrowed against it and deposited the funds into one of those hidden accounts. My signature on the mortgage documents was not my signature. Garrett, the real estate contact, was not primarily a business associate. He had been Renata's boyfriend for at least 4 years. Claire had found this out the way adult children sometimes find things out, through a mutual acquaintance, through the uncomfortable arithmetic of details that didn't add up. She had kept the information and documented it alongside everything else. The total amount she had moved, conservatively calculated, was somewhere above $380,000. 38 years of marriage. 31 years of building a business. Retirement savings I plan to live on for the rest of my life. "There's more, Dad," Claire said. "I'm sorry. There's a lot more." She had recordings. Not from hidden devices like you see in movies, but from conversations she'd had directly with her mother. Conversations where Renata, believing she was talking to her daughter in confidence, had said things that no lawyer would want entered into a court record. Renata had called Claire 3 times in the year before filing, testing the waters, gauging whose side Claire would take. In one of those calls, Renata had explained her strategy for the divorce. "Your father is going to fight this," she had said. "Men like him always do. But I've been prepared for that. Donna and Kathy are both willing to say that he had a temper, that he made me feel unsafe. Garrett thinks we can get the business valuation lowered if we challenge how he reported income over the last decade. By the time we're done, Howard will be lucky to keep the house." Claire had listened to all of it without a word of disagreement, and then she had ended the call and started building a file. She had also kept every text message her mother had sent her over the past 3 years. Messages that referenced the hidden accounts by implication. Messages where Renata discussed Garrett in terms that went far beyond a professional relationship. A message from 18 months ago that read simply, "Once this is done, I'm going to feel like I can breathe again. Just need to get through the next year and then we're free." Claire had saved everything and told me none of it until she was certain she had what we would need. "I couldn't tell you earlier," she said. "You would have confronted her. You would have demanded answers and she would have lawyered up immediately and we would have lost the element of surprise. This only works if she doesn't know what's coming. I looked at my daughter, this 24-year-old, who had watched her family from the outside and understood what was happening before I did, who had spent 3 years organizing evidence with the discipline of someone twice her age. "Why didn't you stay out of it?" I asked. "It wasn't your fight." She looked at me like that was the strangest question I could have asked. "You're my dad." Of course it was my fight. We waited. That was the hardest part. I sat through mediation sessions where Renata's attorney, a man named Douglas Ferris, who had a reputation in Columbus family court for methodical aggression, made demands that turned my stomach. She wanted 60% of the liquid assets. She wanted the lake house. She wanted the investment accounts, half of my pension, and alimony calculated against the highest income year of my contracting business, which had been significantly higher than my retirement income. She wanted, in short, to leave me with enough to get by if I was careful and nothing more. The abuse narrative hadn't surfaced in official filings yet, but Claire had warned me it was coming. Douglas Ferris would hold it as a final card, something to play if I pushed back too hard on the financial terms. I sat across from Renata at those mediation tables, and I looked at a woman I had shared a bed with for 38 years, and I did not recognize her. Not because she had changed. I think that was the hardest thing to absorb. She hadn't changed. This was who she had always been, underneath everything. I had just never been paying the right kind of attention. My own attorney, a competent woman named Sandra Park, was doing her best with the information she had. I had told her to be patient, that we had something we were waiting to deploy, that she needed to trust me on the timing. She was not entirely comfortable with this. Attorneys rarely are. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. The night before, Claire drove down from Cleveland again. We sat in the kitchen and went through everything one last time. She had organized the documentation into 3 folders. The financial records were in the first one, a detailed accounting of every transfer, every hidden account, the forged mortgage signature, the credit accounts opened in my name without my knowledge. The personal communications were in the second, printed transcripts of the recorded phone calls and screenshots of the relevant text messages. The third folder contained something I hadn't known about until that night, the testimony of Donna Mercer. Donna was one of the friends Renata had said would corroborate the abuse narrative. She and Renata had been close since the early 2000s. What Renata didn't know was that Donna had developed a conscience approximately 8 months earlier, or more precisely, that Donna had called Claire 6 months ago after having lunch with Renata and hearing details of the plan that crossed a line even for her. Donna had provided a written statement. She was not willing to testify in court, but her written account described in her own words what Renata had asked her to say, what she had been promised in exchange, and the fact that none of the incidents she was being asked to describe had ever actually occurred. I asked Claire how she had gotten Donna to cooperate. She didn't want to, Claire said. She was scared. I just reminded her what happens to people who commit perjury in divorce proceedings. She thought about it for a week and then she called me back. I went to bed that night and did not sleep. The courtroom the next morning was quiet in the way official places are always quiet, that specific hush of carpet and fluorescent light and low-voiced conversations near the door. Renata was already seated at the petitioner's table when I arrived with Sandra. She was wearing the cream-colored blouse. She looked composed, confident, ready. She did not look at me when I sat down. The hearing proceeded normally for about 20 minutes. Douglas Ferris presented the proposed settlement to Judge Howell in measured, practiced language. Sandra offered objections in the appropriate places. The judge reviewed documents and asked clarifying questions, and everything moved toward a conclusion that would have taken the better part of what I had spent my life building and handed it to a woman who had been systematically stealing from me for years. Then Claire stood up, and everything changed. Judge Howell reviewed the first folder with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who had been on the bench for 17 years and had learned not to react prematurely to surprises. When she got to the third page, she stopped. She went back to the second page. She looked up at Renata. "Missus, Callahan, I'm looking at wire transfer records showing funds moved from a joint account to an account registered solely in your name on 14 separate occasions over a 4-year period. Can you explain this? Douglas Ferris was already on his feet. Your Honor, this documentation has not been submitted through proper discovery channels, and I would object to. The judge held up one hand without looking at him. Counselor, I haven't asked for argument yet. She looked at Renata again. Mrs. Callahan. Renata's composure had not broken yet. She was still trying to hold the shape of it. Those transfers were for household management purposes. I handled our finances. Howard was aware of the general structure of Your daughter has provided account statements showing a current balance of $260,000 in an account your husband's name does not appear on. Was he aware of that account? Renata said nothing. Judge Howell moved to the second folder. She read for several minutes. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. I'm looking at a transcript of a recorded phone call, the judge said finally. In this call, you discuss the divorce proceedings and specifically reference 2 friends who will, and I'm quoting, say that Howard had a temper and made me feel unsafe. She set the folder down. Are these the statements your attorney was planning to introduce? Douglas Ferris had gone very still. I would like to note for the record, Sandra said from beside me, that the respondent has denied any history of abusive behavior, and that we are prepared to demonstrate that the documentation supporting these allegations does not withstand scrutiny. The judge looked at the third folder. She read Donna Mercer's statement slowly. When she finished, she removed her glasses and set them on the bench and looked at Renata with an expression that required no interpretation. Mrs. Callahan, I want you to understand the gravity of what I'm looking at. I'm looking at evidence of financial fraud, specifically the movement of marital assets into undisclosed accounts, the opening of credit accounts in your husband's name without his knowledge, and a mortgage instrument bearing what your daughter's documentation characterizes as a forged signature. I'm also looking at a recorded conversation in which you discuss recruiting witnesses to make false statements in these proceedings. She paused. That is suborning perjury. That is a crime. Your Honor, Douglas Ferris tried again. The recording was obtained without. Ohio is a one-party consent state, Claire said from the gallery. I was a party to every conversation I recorded. Judge Howell looked at her briefly, then back at Renata's attorney. Counselor, unless you have a specific legal challenge to the admissibility of these recordings, I'd ask you to sit down. He sat down. For a moment, nobody moved and nobody spoke. I watched Renata's hands on the table in front of her. She had folded them together and she was pressing them against each other with a force that made her knuckles pale. Then she reached for her purse. She moved quickly for someone who had been sitting still for the past 20 minutes. She stood, grabbed the bag from the back of her chair, and turned toward the side door of the courtroom with the focused, slightly desperate momentum of someone who has calculated that forward is the only available direction. The bailiff was faster. He intercepted her before she cleared the bar. Ma'am, you need to return to your seat. I need to go. I need to call someone. Ma'am? He guided her firmly back toward the petitioner's table. She didn't fight him, but she wasn't entirely cooperative either, moving with the stiff resistance of someone in shock, and when she sat back down, she put both hands flat on the table and stared at them. And the composure that had been her armor all morning was simply gone. Judge Howell watched this without comment. Then she said, I'm recessing this hearing to contact the county prosecutor's office. What I've seen today suggests potential criminal conduct that extends beyond the scope of these civil proceedings. When we reconvene, we will be restructuring this settlement substantially. She banged the gavel, and that was the end of the morning. What came next took the better part of a year to resolve. The prosecutor's office reviewed Claire's documentation and opened a criminal investigation. The financial fraud charges alone were substantial. The forged mortgage instrument was a felony. The credit accounts opened in my name constituted identity theft. The funds moved from our joint accounts and retirement savings had been tracked by Claire with the precision of someone who does this professionally, and the total came to $412,000. The fake abuse narrative added conspiracy charges. Garrett was named as a co-conspirator in the financial scheme. He had received funds from Renata through several of the hidden transfers and had known the money was coming from marital assets. His attorney negotiated a cooperation agreement that required him to testify against her in exchange for reduced charges. He testified. He was thorough and detailed, and I imagine Renata never forgave him for it. Renata was convicted on 11 counts. The sentence was 9 years, with the possibility of parole after 6. Donna Mercer was investigated but not charged, owing largely to the fact that she had come forward voluntarily and her statement had been central to the prosecution's case. The other friend who had agreed to provide false testimony was charged with conspiracy and received 3 years of probation and a permanent record. Douglas Ferris was referred to the Ohio State Bar for disciplinary proceedings. The bar found that he had not known about the fraudulent evidence beforehand, but the inquiry was not pleasant for his reputation, and I understand his practice suffered for it. In the civil settlement, I received the house and the lake house. I received the retirement accounts in full. The court ordered restitution calculated against the documented stolen amount, which would be paid back to me over time. I would not see all of it quickly, but I would see it. I drove Claire back to her car after the hearing reconvened, and the settlement was formalized. We sat in the parking garage for a few minutes without talking. "How long have you known?" I finally asked. "About Garrett specifically." "About 4 years," she said. "And you carried that for 4 years?" She shrugged in the way she has shrugged since she was a teenager. The shrug that means, this is simply the situation, it is what it is. I didn't know what to do with it at first. I was 20. I thought maybe it would stop. She shook her head. And then, when I saw what she was doing with the money, I understood that it wasn't going to stop. That she had a plan and she'd been running it for a long time. "You should have been able to just live your life at 20. She looked at me sideways. "Dad, you put me through school. You drove 5 hours round trip to every soccer game I ever played, until I was 16. You taught me to change my own oil and balance a budget, and not take things at face value." She paused. "Protecting you was the least complicated thing I've ever decided to do." I didn't have anything to say to that. I reached over and put my hand on the top of her head the way I used to when she was small, and she let me, which she almost never does anymore. 2 years have passed since the hearing. I still live in the Worthington house. I considered selling it. Thought about it for several months, walking through rooms that held 30 years of memories that now felt like they'd been filmed on a set rather than lived in actual life. But I decided to stay. The house is mine. I paid for it with work and time that no one can take back, and I decided I was not going to let anyone take the house from me too. I renovated the kitchen last spring, new cabinets, new counters, did a lot of the electrical work myself because old habits. The garage has been reorganized into something that finally makes sense. I sleep well now, which I didn't for about 18 months after everything came out. Claire is doing well. She made senior associate at her firm earlier this year, which surprised no one who has ever watched her work. She came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we cooked together in the new kitchen and watched football and argued about nothing important the way families are supposed to. She's been seeing someone for about a year, a civil engineer from Akron. She brought him to Christmas. He was respectful and a little nervous and helped clear the table without being asked, which I considered a reasonable start. Renata's parole hearing is scheduled for next year. I've been asked whether I want to submit a statement. I've been thinking about it. Part of me understands that she has been punished in ways that extend beyond prison. She lost her freedom and her reputation and her marriage and, most significantly, her daughter. Claire has not visited her, has not written to her, to my knowledge, has answered exactly one phone call from the prison and kept it to 4 minutes. I know this because Claire told me, in the same matter-of-fact voice she uses when discussing facts that are simply facts, "I don't have anything to say to her, Dad. It's not anger. I just don't have anything." She paused. She made her choices. I made mine. That's where we are. Another part of me remembers the phone calls, the casual, almost cheerful way Renata discussed dismantling my life. The plan to use false abuse allegations as a weapon, to recruit friends to lie under oath, to leave me in a position where I would spend whatever years I had left scraping by while she rebuilt somewhere new with someone else. Some things require a very long time to forgive, and some things you decide not to waste your energy trying to forgive because the effort would cost you more than it returns. I haven't decided about the statement yet. I may ask Claire what she thinks. I usually ask Claire what she thinks these days. She has earned the consultation. There's one thing I want to say before I finish, because I've thought about it a great deal in the past 2 years. A lot of people who hear stories like this one ask some version of the same question. How did you not know? How could you miss something that large for that long? And I understand why people ask it. I asked it myself many times, usually at 2 a.m. in the first year after the hearing, lying in a house that felt both familiar and completely foreign. The honest answer is that I trusted her. I trusted her the way you trust the people you've built a life with, completely and without regular auditing, because to do otherwise is to treat your marriage like a fraud investigation rather than a partnership. I gave her control of our finances because she was competent and because I was busy and because I believed, all the way down to the bedrock of my assumptions, that she was doing what she told me she was doing. That trust was weaponized against me. That's not a reflection of my intelligence or my competence. It's a reflection of what happens when someone decides to exploit the people who love them. The fault lies entirely with the person who made that choice. What I would tell anyone watching this, and anyone going through something similar, is this. Talk to the people in your life who are paying attention. The ones who don't have something to gain from keeping you in the dark. Claire saw what was happening before I did because she was looking from the outside. The people who love you sometimes see things you can't. And if you're managing shared finances with a partner, stay involved. Not out of suspicion, not as surveillance, but as a habit of mutual transparency. It doesn't prevent every kind of betrayal. Nothing does. But it makes certain kinds harder to sustain in secret for 5 years. The other thing I would say is about my daughter. I raised Claire to be honest, to do the work, to not look away from hard things because they're uncomfortable. I thought I was teaching her how to get through the world with her integrity intact. What I didn't fully understand until I was sitting in that parking garage was that she had applied every one of those lessons to the job of protecting me. That for 3 years, a young woman in her early 20s had been quietly, methodically making sure that her father did not get destroyed by someone who should have loved him better. I don't know how to account for that. I'm not sure the language exists for it. I just know that I got lucky, in the specific way that a person is lucky when they've raised someone worth knowing, and then that person shows up when it counts. Last month, Claire called me on a Sunday evening the way she usually does. We talked about her work, about the engineer from Akron, about a pipe fitting issue in the lake house I'd been putting off addressing. Before she hung up, she said, "I'm glad it's better, Dad. You seem like yourself again." I told her I was getting there, that most days felt normal now, that I'd started going to a history lecture series at the Columbus Library on Thursday evenings, which she found very funny for reasons she didn't fully explain. "You deserve boring Thursdays," she said. "You really do." We said goodbye. I made dinner. I sat in the kitchen with a book I'd been meaning to read for 3 months, and the winter light coming through the windows. I'd replaced myself last October, and I thought about what it means to start over at 63, in a house you know every corner of, with a daughter who calls every Sunday and means it. It means more than I know how to say. But I'm going to figure out how to say it, one Thursday at a time. If you stayed to the end of this, thank you. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to get through betrayal and come out the other side with something real. And if you're in the middle of something hard right now, find the person in your life who is paying attention. They're there. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to tell you what they know.